Hey there, welcome back to This Week in Social Media. I'm Rob Tersick, and this week we've got a great show. It's Social Games with veteran gamer Thom Kozik and LA Times tech reporter Alex Pham. Stay with us, this is going to be a great show. Hey, welcome back to the show. It's Rob Tersick here with This Week in Social Media. And this week we're talking about social games, a great big topic, one of the most interesting areas of social media, also one of the most lucrative. And I've got two great guests today. Alex Pham, who's a veteran journalist from the Los Angeles Times. She's been covering the tech beat for more than 10 years. We've known each other forever. I'm delighted to have her join us today. And I've also hi Alex. Also here with me in the studio is my good friend Thom Kozik, who's spent as many years in the game industry as me, or maybe more, actually. Welcome to the show.
I don't want to compare ages, but maybe, who knows?
Yeah, who knows? We're crusty old farts, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
But that's good because it gives us a chance to have put some perspective on this topic. You know, social games seems like a hot new topic, but it's been around actually for a while. You know, in the 90s, we were building community into games. That was just code for social.
Right. I mean, you can take the premise that chess was social. Going all the way back to Babylonian times.
You got it. No, in fact, that's a really good point. So. In gamer lore, we talk about games as a social lubricant, which sounds sort of like a nasty type of thing you might get at the pleasure chest or something. But what we mean by that is it's a way to kind of ease through the rough spots in social interaction in general, in the real world. And so, those people playing chess in Central Park, well, that is a kind of social lubricant. The game is a mechanism for people to connect with each other. Strangers can meet and they have something in common. It's why guys talk about sports when they're in the elevator in office buildings, right? It's just another kind of social lubricant. But now we have this new phenomenon, or at least relatively hyped new phenomenon, social games. A hot topic. It's in the press a lot. And I thought it'd be great for us to start and ask Alex just to give us a sense of the size of this business. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about the social gaming market? How big is it? How many people are playing?
It's actually, in terms of dollars, it's relatively small. So one estimate from Parks Associates says that worldwide social gaming revenue was $1 billion in 2010, and they project that it's going to grow to $5 billion by 2015. Now you compare that to anywhere between $25 and $30 billion for traditional console and PC games, and you get a little perspective there. But I guess what's hot about it is that it's been growing very, very rapidly. It's a relatively new slice of gaming. Zynga, which is probably the most well-known company, was only started in 2007, and its first big breakout hit, which is Farmville, wasn't released until June of 2009. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon, and it's been growing relatively fast ever since. And of course, it's highly profitable at times, although some people would argue how profitable it really is. But you're talking about games that cost, I don't know, $100,000 to $500,000 to make, and the recurring revenue stream looks pretty attractive for investors out there.
Very cool. Thanks for those stats. So roughly, you say $1 billion is what your Parks Associates data gives you. Now, we've heard much higher estimates as well. It's a little bit elusive, right? Because this is happening all over the world in places like China, also throughout Europe and other parts of the world, wherever people are connected to the web. So it's a little hard to gather that info, partly because most of the companies that are the leaders in social games aren't really public companies. So we don't know exactly what's happening there.
That's correct.
Well, even the ones that are, I mean, you look at the recent acquisitions by Disney or by EA.
They're not going to break out social.
They're not breaking out the details. As we were talking about earlier, there's the distinction between what is a virtual good revenue line versus what's social gaming, and those lines, depending on which analyst you're looking at, are going to blur a little bit.
That's right.
But it's the aspect of social as layered on top of gaming can be defined a couple of different ways. It's not just all Facebook.
Well, that's a good starting point. Let's start with that. So let's work out a definition of what social gaming is. I'm going to ask you, Thom, to go for it. So what do you tell me? What do you think the proper definition of a social game would be?
I'll defer, and I'll start by actually debunking that there needs to be a definition. I always love the fact.
I can answer the question by not answering it. Yes,
no, I will answer it. But the analogy I want to draw is Esther Dyson years ago, when the multimedia industry was first starting up in the early 90s, right? And we were all building, Windows was going to make audio and video and everything. Esther famously got up at a conference, because every week there was another multimedia industry conference. The trade press was littered with multimedia industry magazines. And she got up and wagged her finger at the industry and said, there is no multimedia industry. Multimedia is a feature. It's part and parcel of everything we are going to be doing. It's not an industry unto itself. I say the same is true about what we're defining today as social gaming.
Okay, that's a really good point. So we say that here on the show. Our motto for the show is all media is social media. And so what Tom's saying is all games, rightly, should have a social component to them.
Correct.
But that means that the games have to be networked.
Yes.
I have a very good friend who's crazy about DragonAge, which is a kick-ass game if you happen to like that sort of like slashing up dragons and fighting orcs kind of thing. This person does. They're a huge fan of the game. They play it all the time, and yet it has no connection to the web. There's no, even though you spend hours building a great character and building up that character, but then you can't actually do collaborative combat or go on missions together with your friends.
Right.
There's no network component.
Yeah, I always call those as Lego games. They're fun to build, they're fun to assemble, but then the best you can do is bring somebody over and say, look at what I just did. You can't actually express it or participate collaboratively.
In this day and age of everything being connected, or us assuming, right, that everything's got a network connection, it seems a little bit of an anachronism for a game, a video game, to have no network component to it.
It is.
Hasn't dinged that company's success or that product's success. That's a rocking good title.
Right, but it's a good title in and of itself. You're not seeing it as a trend indicative of what's going on across the entire industry.
So tell me how gamers integrate social into a game concept then.
Well, I think it's, going back to this historical analogy about every game is social to some degree or another, right? That what we're doing is we're seeing a flip. If you look back when Xbox Live and even PlayStation Network launched, we were all giddy in the industry about what an explosion this was of the ability to connect with different people. But we were doing it from within the framework of the game. You started first in the game, and even today, you fire up Call of Duty and you decide, what does Xbox Live tell me in terms of who else is out there playing? For you to go through the exercise of finding out if one of your friends, you have to almost go, for years you had to go through the meat space, the physical world, to find what your friend's gamer tag was to connect with them. There wasn't anything social about it.
Originally, multiplayer was your friends brought over a knapsack full of video games and you sat next to each other.
That was where it first started, when we all had extension cables on our controllers. Then it went to, what's your gamer tag so I can include you in my list? We saw a lot of friendships develop out of Xbox Live and systems like that. But now, the reality is it's shifted the other way. I have my friends, first and foremost, expressed via a Facebook, a Google+, a Yahoo Messenger, and I decide what game are we going to play. Now I can play games with the people I already know. It's versus starting from the standpoint of a game that I'm engaged in and looking who I can play that with.
Sure, okay, I understand the issue. So back in the 90s when I was developing Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune and Dating Game Online, we started with the assumption that you had to make a connection with strangers because you weren't going to have a way to find your friends. It was fairly novel to be developing an online game in those days. So the ruling assumption wasn't that your friends were already online. The assumption was you had to find new friends, and so you were attracted to the game. What you're saying now is, in your experience at Yahoo, and Yahoo Games, you had that experience, right? Where
we saw the first shift of that with Yahoo Messenger, where if you think about the core, that Yahoo Messenger was nothing more than a lot of what we do in building a social graph on Facebook or anywhere else today. I identified my friends.
Right, so you start with the friends, and then you could find a game through Yahoo Messenger.
Right.
And that actually had an impact on the...
Oh, it's a phenomenal impact. We had, at the largest single volume, we had about 10 million hours of gameplay a month in just a handful of 5 games that were wired into it. And actually, truth be told, they were the worst games we had.
Wow.
These were old, circa 1998 Java interfaced, web-based games. Yeah. And the gameplay volume on them was far and away magnitude different from anything else we had.
And that's almost 10 years ago. I mean, that
was 2004.
Yeah, so like 8 years ago, you were doing that. Now we've got almost 10 times the number of people on the web, right? You had about 200, 300 million people using the internet back in those days, maybe closer to 350 million in those days. But today, there's 2 billion people using the internet. Right. And by and large, most of them are outside the United States. That's why I want to remind everybody this is not a phenomenon that's limited to the US. So today, you've got gigantic new businesses, entirely new companies. In some cases, they're only a couple of years old, that have emerged out of this space of social networks and then some sort of gameplay erected on top of them. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about the leading companies in social gaming and how they're different, perhaps, from the traditional game companies?
Sure. We've got a number of companies that are purely social. We're talking about Zynga, and we're talking about Digital Chocolate, Wooga. There's just dozens and dozens of them, and new ones are cropping up every single day. The largest one being Zynga. It has a 49% market share on Facebook.
Wow.
And everyone else has to split up the rest of the pie. So one of my favorite ones is Kabam. and they are exploiting a niche, a vertical niche, whereas Zynga goes wide and tries to go for the masses, with, say over 250 million people playing its games on a monthly basis, to Kabam is looking at more lucrative players, people who will play more devotedly for longer periods of time and can spend a lot more money per month. So some of its players spend hundreds of dollars every month playing its games.
Wow.
So it's exploiting a much more hardcore niche. Its games are much more hardcore than Zynga's. Zynga's tend to be more friendly. And then you have, other vertical niches. You have hidden games, companies that do just hidden games, or hidden object games, where you're finding objects in a scenery, and that's something that a lot of people really like to do. Other people, exploit the casino type games with the pokers and the bingos. So it's, you have companies that go wide, like Zynga, and you have companies that go narrow, like Kabam.
Okay.
And I think there'll be room for all these companies going forward.
I noticed
think we've
that
just
you
scratched the surface.
I noticed you didn't mention any traditional game publishers in your calculus there of who the big players are. Of course, there were a couple of notable acquisitions, right? Disney acquired Playdom, and Electronic Arts acquired Playfish, both in 2009. Right. Those were important because those companies, frankly, are big publishers in the interactive space. Interactive media is games. But they weren't. Exactly. They had no play whatsoever in social, and so they felt like they had to buy their way into the segment.
Right.
Tom, what's your take on that? I mean, have those been successful acquisitions? Has that made a material impact on the operation of those companies in any way?
Well, you got to put aside the reasons that Disney and EA respectively made those acquisitions, but in the case of EA in particular, you had, with the acquisition of Playfish, they got a different way of thinking about distribution.
So they bought the DNA that they needed into their company because they couldn't recruit it.
Yeah, and well, it's not just much that you can't recruit it. I mean, there's a lot of game developers would history aside, would love to work at a place like EA with the depth of resources. It's the challenge, and I witnessed this also with my time running Atari's mobile and online business and building that up. The challenge is in taking a company that has such a tremendous amount, to Alex's earlier point, of your balance sheet dedicated to traditional shiny silver discs on shelves, and simultaneously focusing on something that is, while incredibly high margin, a very different economic proposition to the company. And so it wasn't only an acquisition of DNA, it was an acquisition to keep it a little bit separate and nurture them and let them build out the business as they need to.
Yeah.
But yet you have, at the other end of the spectrum, somebody who we haven't mentioned yet, Activision, who's still, relatively speaking, hanging out in the sidelines, looking for how they're going to enter on this. And while you can say they're a massive social gaming company with Blizzard, with Warcraft and StarCraft, not in the same genre or context or cost structures that we're talking about. The cost structures, cost structures of those games haven't changed from the traditional shiny silver disc business.
Okay, actually, so this is really a super conversation, Alex. I want to make sure we include you here. So what we're talking about right now is kind of a decision point that publishers had to make. Big game publishers, they saw this phenomenon blowing up after 2007. Social games was growing super, super fast. And companies like Zynga had figured out a way to make money with social games, which had been a little bit elusive, but it's one of the reasons why Zynga was so important, is they'd figured out you can offer a game for free, 100 people will play it for free, and then 1 or 2 of them will actually buy virtual objects, upgrade, and so forth, and that 1 or 2% end up not just covering the cost of the other 98%, but they actually make it profitable. Well, this formula was something that companies, as you say, that were in the habit of publishing shiny silver discs, they weren't really used to that. So the traditional publishing business for fixed media, not just games, but music, and frankly, home video for the movie studios, is all about pushing product, pushing recorded media that's on a shiny disc, a DVD or a CD. And that business is cratering right now.
I think it's tapering off. I think it's leveling and maturing. I think what they say is it's a maturing business. But Steve Wadsworth, who was at Disney Interactive a few years back, made a great presentation. He said that social games is the opposite of what traditional gaming companies are used to doing. They used to build the game and then they ship it and they forget it, and then they move on to their next game. What social games do is they turn that on its head. They build a product, And then they give it away for free.
Yeah.
They say, go ahead, go for it. And then they start proving their value and start collecting the money afterwards. But they have to give away enough of the product to hook people in for free. So it's sort of a different thinking and mentality. And I think you're seeing that the console business and console publishers and traditional game publishers, they're getting the message. They're not dumb. They're facing a build or buy decision. Right. And with EA, they bought. With Disney, they bought, but other people are building in social features into console games as well. Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, they allow for a lot of social gaming features. So as Thom said earlier, with Esther Dyson's point, social gaming is a feature. Social is a feature. It's being built in a number of different ways for all kinds of gaming, whether it's console gaming on a disc or network gaming on Xbox Live or PlayStation Network. I have to correct a point that was said earlier. DragonAge did have a social gaming component. It was called DragonAge Legends, and it was actually quite popular among DragonAge players. And from what and that was something that they built in-house at BioWare, right. As a companion experience to DragonAge. You didn't have to play it.
Did they kill it?
No, I think it's still up and running.
So it's still there. It's just a separate thing.
Right, but it's a separate thing. That's the piece.
It's a separate thing. It's a companion piece to DragonAge. You don't have to play.
Oh, well, maybe
the
BioWare will plug in that online version then with the standalone game. That would actually be great. That would...
Tying this in, though, to social media in particular and to what Alex just said, the analogy I've always liked is the transition the big game companies are going through as it relates to audiences and social audiences in particular is analogous to what we see in Hollywood with a studio makes a picture, bakes it for several years, massive budget, massive effort, puts it out and tries to develop an audience for it.
Right.
Versus television, much more dollar cost averaged in, let's do a pilot, let's see if anybody responds. If there is an audience already for it out there in existence, we'll time it into the schedule to see, can we put it alongside another show to bring that audience in with it? And if it works, then we invest more and more and more. But we didn't have to do an entire season up front until we knew we had a show that had an audience.
Although even that is changing, right? That's a different show. We'll come and do that show at some point in the future. But it's a valid point you're making. I think it's safe to say every traditional publisher is confronted with this rise of social media, the idea that you can assemble an audience before you actually have an offer. That's kind of a crazy notion if you've been trained in the idea that you first develop your concept and then go produce the whole thing, and then you spend a massive amount on marketing to get an audience for it, right? And that's historically been the case, whether it's a record album or a book or a movie, even a game. We tend to think of game companies as more high tech and maybe a little bit more forward thinking, but in fact, it's surprising when you talk to the companies, the traditional game companies, they are no more well advanced or well versed in this stuff than book publishers or music companies. They're flummoxed by new media just as much as anybody else. So they're having to buy their way in. Let's take another look at the economics. Let's talk just briefly about that. So the social game, I touched on this concept that 1 or 2% are the ones who pay. Mm-hmm. And yesterday we had an interesting chat about monetization, the path towards monetization. Right. Tell me a little bit about how you make money with a game like this.
Well, clearly it's from a standpoint of virtual goods, which one of the interesting things, and particularly if you look at the industry economics around Zynga and their upcoming IPO, and a lot of noise in the press recently about, oh my gosh, they had to restate things or the numbers didn't look the same way as before. What people are forgetting is unlike EA, when I sell you that shiny silver disc, or actually when EA sells this shiny silver disc to Walmart or GameStop or Best Buy or whomever is going to retail it, EA is able to recognize all the revenue from that disc sale right then and there. Zynga, on the other hand, if they sell you a tractor in Farmville, they can't recognize the value of that tractor for the projected lifespan of however long you may be a Farmville player. Now, of course, they want to consider that you and your friends are going to be Farmville players for a long, long time. So it changes the economics of how a game company's revenue are recognized.
Is that one of the reasons why they haven't gone public yet? Have they been having to noodle that around and massage those numbers?
I can't say specifically, but I know that was one of the big things that a lot of the folks didn't get when they saw the S1 and looked at the numbers and the way the revenue recognition worked. But to your question about revenue and how you make money, it is not only selling you the tractor, but as the game companies have learned very quickly in the last couple of years, selling you consumable items, boost, fuel, energy, whatever. Selling you those things, of course, I can recognize the revenue instantly.
Right, because they evaporate, right?
It's immediate use. But they've learned how to incorporate those items into the flow with your friends, getting back to social again. How do I structure the completion of some task in the game that the tangible items are of lower value and your friends can pass those back and forth so there's no revenue issue, and the more premium boosts are things that you're going to expend in the game, and that means you got to spend money. And so they look at how do you transition you from a stage of first exploit you to bring your friends along with and help me build the audience.
Yeah.
Second, start to incorporate your friends into the actual completion of the game. And third, now dangle the carrot out in front of you that you have to spend a little bit of money to complete what you started in the game.
Well, that part we have you make a really good case for, and we actually have some pictures to show, so we can go through that. But before we jump into that, let me just double check here with Alex. Alex, so let's talk a little bit about the economic model. We did invite the folks from Zynga to join us, but unfortunately, because of that S1 filing, they are getting ready to go public, and the federal government requires that you stay quiet during that period. So they're not able to do any media, but we'll get them back after that process is complete. Probably won't be until next year, but I'm very excited to have them join us. We also invited Christian Siegerstrahl from Electronic Arts. He's the guy who started Playfish, a good friend of mine I've known for years. And he was not able to join us today either, but he'll come back and we'll have you back for another conversation so we can talk to these two leading companies in a future point when they're able to comment publicly. But in the meantime, Alex, tell me a little bit about this economic model, because what Thom just set forth is a really unusual concept, right? We're talking about people who traditionally would develop a product and then they'd kind of create a gold master, produce a whole bunch of copies of them, put them in stores, and they'd make money through retailers or through online, and they'd sell the thing, and as you said, ship it and forget it. Now you have this very interesting proposition. You're going to develop a game, but it's more like running a service. Can you speak to that a little bit and how companies have to shift their thought process from shipping products to launching services?
Well, it's how you invest in the product. And there's one thing that we haven't really touched on that's very powerful that works in favor of the game companies in a live service model, and that is metrics. Every single day, every single minute, every single hour, just tons and tons of data flow in from how millions and millions of people interact with your game.
Right.
So you can tweak the color on a special offer on a virtual good, and that could influence how many people click on it. So it's real-time reaction to the consumers that are interacting with your game. So I think that's very, very powerful.
And that's entirely new, right? That's a completely new phenomenon. In the past, if you shipped a fixed media product, you basically had no idea what people were doing with it. But today, social gaming companies have very sophisticated analytics that let them know in real time how many people are consuming what, how they're using it, how long they're using it, how long they're staying on the game. And a whole new lexicon has emerged of daily average users, daily average minutes spent in the game, and so forth. So the game companies now have to be kind of monitoring this stuff in real time. It's much more analytically driven, I think.
As well as learning the lessons that we as an industry learned in e-commerce, of how to do recommendation engines, and to say that the offers you're going to get on your screen are going to be different based not only on your previous purchases or where you're at in the game, but who your friends are and what level they're at in the game. So just the same way we've had social commerce start to creep into the eBays and the Amazons and everything else in the world, you're now seeing those lessons start to get incorporated into social games.
So there's lessons here for people outside of the gaming industry. In fact, this is something that everybody should be paying attention. Any company that previously sold a product and now has to shift into the world of selling a service or offering a service now has to deal with customer lifetime and all the things that the customer might do. And as we can see, with a game like Farmville or Cityville, you can be talking about hundreds of millions of microtransactions in a single day. So running one of these companies is very different from a traditional publisher because it's more akin to running a credit card company where you're tracking zillions of transactions, kind of a massive number of transactions.
And there's one last point relative to your question about the monetization model, and I'd be interested in Alex's perspective on this as well. The 2% conversion that we all know, and I mean it's funny because I can go back to the Yahoo days when we were offering $20 downloads of Diner Dash or Bejeweled, the old standalone game, and it was about the same. 2% would buy and 98% would just try it and burn out the limited minutes we offered. What's interesting about this space is that unlike all the other gaming models, there's no upper limit on how much your most engaged fans will spend. So, we all know, it's very secretive, but, Zynga and Playfish have their secret pricing strategies that if somebody's spending upwards of $500 a month across all the games, they're getting really great discounts. But this, again, is another lesson we simply learned from another big social gaming place called Las Vegas, where you bring the whale never comes alone. The whale always brings all their friends with them on the plane.
Exactly right. Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. I'm glad you brought it up. So it's really two things. The whale, right, the high roller, the person that spends a great deal of money, they have outsized influence because really they're super profitable. And then because it's social, they kind of bring their posse. And this is one of the most interesting things in my conversation with Tom. The reason I wanted to have him join us here was to talk about this, because this is perhaps the most sophisticated new trend that's emerging in social gaming. And that is the ability for social game platforms to serve different offers to different players, depending on how sophisticated they are, how mature they are, how much money they spend, how engaged they are, and most importantly, how sophisticated their social graph is. So this is really quite interesting. If you come with a posse, if you're connected with a really high-rolling group of people, you're going to get treated different at a social game, just as you would with a casino, right?
That's
the analogy you're making. It's a really fun concept. That's brand new. Why don't we, on that note, why don't we go through a quick tour of the rapid evolution? So as Alex pointed out, social gaming is a fairly new phenomenon. It's only been around really since 2007, when Facebook opened up its platform for third-party developers. Fairly primitive games were introduced then. And really, they were just online versions of some of those downloadable games that Tom had mentioned. But rapidly, game developers figured out how to integrate the social graph. And so let's take a look. If we can go to the screen here on my computer, we're going to flip through a few things.
Right.
So you can
so
see
real
them
quick,
here.
we take a look at a couple of screens from Mafia Wars.
Yeah.
And these are old archival images, but you had...
Right, this is from the ancient period of 2009.
Right. Database-driven games, not a graphical Flash-based interface that I could interact with, but I had...
It hardly even looks like a game, right? It's
I know.
It looks like you're setting up something. It's like a control panel.
And this, I think, was where a lot of the traditional gamers started looking down their nose too far in advance on Zynga and saying, oh, that's not real games. These are games.
Traditional gamers look down their nose at every kind of new innovation that comes along.
But you had a couple different friend interactions here. I could choose to do battle with a particular friend, or you also see towards the bottom of the screen, I could enlist the help of particular friends, but there wasn't a lot of data about, because the network couldn't support it. The social graph, as Facebook calls their product, or any other social structure, didn't support a lot of independent data interchange to know what my friends had.
Yeah.
So I couldn't really contribute, well, my friend is a level 25 player, so therefore I'm going to do better. I just would pick randomly fairly here.
Let's flip to the next one. Yeah.
You saw they started to progress a little bit farther along, where I got to select from my database of friends once the social network started getting a little bit more sophisticated, and I could see their stats, and I could choose to integrate them a little bit differently at different points in different missions. And this was probably the second big generation of where Mafia Wars went.
This is still like in around 2009 that we're looking
this is,
at.
This is a late 09 screen.
I mean, it's funny, to me, it looks like it's 10 years old. This is how sophisticated these game screens have gotten in just a short period of time, just a couple of years. That's partly because of the intense competition they're facing.
So if we jump forward to Farmville.
Yeah, so here's Farmville.
So now we started to see, we got into the cutesy anime-style graphic interfaces, but more importantly, and I simply smiley-faced out my friend's pictures there, you'll forgive me, but you now started to get into the point where you selectively would choose which friends to bring in, but you also had another transition where those friends, you could buy a placeholder. If I didn't want to invite a friend, or I didn't want to annoy, this was an era where people were starting to get spammed way too much by game invites, I could simply choose to pay and put a placeholder where I needed somebody to help fulfill a mission.
It's a real important milestone. So what Tom just said to us, which bears repeating, is here with Farmville, you had a decision point that was presented to the player. There was an element of strategy in how much would you spam your social network or your social graph. If you probably remember those days in 2009 when you were getting Farmville updates constantly, and it was kind of polluting your feed on Facebook and making it kind of an unpleasant experience, particularly if you weren't playing that game and didn't care.
It had ran the risk of ruining the growth curve of Facebook. That's why they had to crank it down.
And people were unfriending friends who were too prolific in their posting, and so you would, if you didn't like that, you had primitive tools for filtering. Yes, you'd shut them down. So what they did, what Zynga did, which I think is kind of brilliant, but in kind of an evil genius way, what they did was they gave you an option. You could spam your wall and tell all your friends, or you could pay them money. And in a way, that was the game, right? The game there was blackmail. It was basically either you're going to get stuck in this place and you're going to have to make a decision. You can either spam everybody on your list, or you can pay us off, and then we'll kind of advance you to the next level.
So if we jump forward again now, the big jump here over a couple of years.
So here's Cityville, right? And now gifting is implicit in the game concept. Right here, this is just a splash screen for Cityville, but that social component has become
right. You still have the gifting. You still have the gifting, but where we've shifted to is the need for your social friends. I have to go visit them, I have to go participate with them, but I have a deeper level of interaction in the game.
Let's take a look. Here's a couple examples. So the first one, here's post to your wall. So they give you that, but now it's an option, right?
Right.
Now the trick when you're playing Cityville, I've made this mistake a lot, is sometimes you hit the wrong button and so you start spamming your friends.
Everybody in the world knows that you're playing the game.
They still get you to do that from time to time.
Sure.
This is the next one. So here now there's a business proposition.
Right. So now instead of the old social model, and right now at about this point in time, early 2010, the other social game publishers were also picking up on this same trend, which was it's not just about I have to go visit your farm and take care of your crops, that I can actually establish, I can participate with you in whatever you're building. And so they ended up with the franchise model and you started expanding. So I now had, what they introduced was more of a reason for my friends to participate with me on a day-to-day basis within my world, within the game world I was building. More so than just come by and get points on your own.
And then you also had the opportunity to invite people in to build your community. And as you can see, a fairly sophisticated integration of your friend's dashboard down at the bottom. It's a little bit more like your inventory in a regular game. So they've started to design these so that the social component looks more familiar to games.
Right. Then
this was interesting to me when I was playing this. That this is from the very first time I played Cityville, and I was amazed to find there were points in the game where you simply couldn't progress unless you recruited friends in. So you had to have a social network here, otherwise you got stuck.
Bearing it more into integrating it, not bearing it really, integrating it more into the missions and the leveling in the game, that you had to have your friends participate, and otherwise that part of the game would not be open to you. You could play solo, and all these games started introducing the one first virtual friend that the game started you off with. There was always one, non-player character they gave you, so you at least had somebody to interact with. But that was a training model.
Samantha.
That was a training model to get you to understand how you needed your friends to come in and participate as well.
That's right. Okay, so now we get to the more current games. So here we have Empires and Allies, right?
Right. So in Empires and Allies, there's an even stronger emphasis on collaboration. A couple of things also. As game publishers were back to making game or something that's more akin to a game. Whereas the function down at the lower portion of the screen that lets me choose which of my friends I'm going to strategically choose. I'm going to scroll through my friends, look at their levels, look at their capabilities, and choose which ones have which weapons to collaborate on this particular task I have to accomplish right now.
So this is a really sophisticated idea.
More sophisticated, but also the emphasis is back into the game. I'm not interrupting the gameplay with big dialogue boxes and taking the user back to the framework from Facebook to have to make those selections. I can actually do it in-game, but it is very much more emphasis on collaboration.
Right. And in a way, in my game, I'm the protagonist of my game. I'm the hero of my own movie in a game world, right? But and Tom, as my friend, would be a bit part player in my story. But in his case, it's the exact opposite. He's the protagonist, the main hero of his game world, and I'm just a bit part player in his world. And so in a game like Empires and Allies, you've got other players become kind of a chess piece on your chessboard, which I think is a fascinating idea. So they've introduced a strategy element. So this is way different from spamming people. Now you're leveraging your social network in a strategic way in order to advance the game. And of course, once you've done that, you've now incurred an obligation, a social obligation to those other players, and so they can call that shit in when they need help as well, and then you'll have to come to the rescue, and they get to use your.
And that's a mechanic that's been in gaming, multiplayer gaming, to Alex's point, for a long time in traditional console world. It's now that we're opening it up to that broader social graph that the networks give us, that it becomes much more fun, because I know why I'm enlisting you versus some random person I know from Xbox Live.
Yeah, it's a better game experience, and you're actually in the game. Like your involvement in my game is more meaningful.
Right, because we have a relationship outside the game.
That's right. So what have you got here then? This is Sims, right?
Yeah, lastly, the point I want to make with Sims is now we've come, I won't say full circle, because I'm not sure where the circle ends quite yet. I think the industry's got a long way to go. But not only can I, all the same mechanics we've seen before, I have to go get my friends to give me things or gift me things to complete this mission. I have the pricing mechanic. I can spend money if I don't want to spam my friends. I can buy the items. But at an overarching level within Sims, what's really interesting about this topic is that if you think about Farmville as an analogy, if I don't visit Farmville every day, my crops wither and die.
Yeah.
In Sim Social, my character, I'm the one that withers and dies. Well, I don't die, but I wither if I don't go visit my friends. If I don't interact socially enough,
that's cool.
my attributes and my characteristics diminish because it's all about being social. That's the premise of the game.
That's kind of true in the real world too, right? If you don't hang out with your friends and you're not very social, then your social skills are going to atrophy.
The relationships deteriorate. I may have a relationship with a player, and the relationship itself has its own attributes. It's either we're really good friends, we're BFF, all the way down to we're awkward friends. There's a whole scale they have in the game, and where that relationship is dependent on how active I am with those friends.
Right on. Sorry, Alex, what did you say?
I said you can even be enemies.
That's right.
Which is even more hilarious.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and as Tom pointed out, there's certainly examples of games like Call of Duty Online where you could play that role. You could play either side. And so in this way, I think these social games are starting to learn from some traditional games that had some network component. They're starting to introduce that element in, those dynamics of those regular game dynamics. Okay, so here's a brand new game that you were about to tell us about.
Yeah, so this is a screenshot from Kaijuland, which will be, it's in beta right now. Closed beta. It'll be public within the next couple of months up on Facebook and other networks. But what's interesting about this one is the introduction of a whole new social dimension. There's a bit of a Tamagotchi aspect to it. Kaiju is the Japanese word for strange beast or strange monster. It's the whole Godzilla, Mothra, Gamera genre of films that we all remember.
Obviously.
And you grow your own monster. But a couple of different social dimensions about the monster. When you grow your monster is only grown by the mating of two monsters from friends of yours, and so,
cool.
or you can acquire, or you can just simply buy a monster. So when I mate two of my friends' monsters to create my monster, that monster I of course care for it, curate it like I do in a Tamagotchi world, and then I utilize it in the game. But like at the every Godzilla movie ended with him wandering back off into the ocean. That monster is only my monster for a limited period of time until it evaporates and goes away. A new player can acquire it, can buy it, can attract it, but the lineage of that monster, who it played against, who curated it, who its parents were, is preserved in the system. And so there's an entire social family tree of, oh, this used to be Rob's monster.
That's great.
And before that it was Alex's. And she got it by pairing up so-and-so's monster with somebody else's monster. If you think about it,
so there's if you have a very promiscuous parent creature, then you can actually spread your genes throughout the whole gene pool in some respect, I guess. There is a new definition of social gaming for you.
I think one of the things that social gaming takes great advantage of in this new era where you're bombarded with millions of choices is the attention economy. If you can manage to grab the attention and the social currency with your friends, I think that's become one of the more valuable things to have in this connected world. So if you're able to use your social currency to wrap in hundreds of your friends to play the game with you, I think that's incredibly valuable these days because people have no shortage of things that they can do with their time now.
Well, Alex, it's a really good point, and it's not just valuable to the individual player to have a lot of friends who they encourage to play with them and have a lot of reasons to interact, but it's really valuable to Facebook. And it's really valuable to the game publishers, the social game publishers. Let's not forget that more than half the people on Facebook have played social games, and they estimate that active players of the 800 or so million members of Facebook, they estimate that about 350 million, almost half of them, are active social gamers. And so one way to look at Facebook, we talk about it as a social network that monetizes in various ways, but one way to look at Facebook is to say it's actually a gigantic games platform that uses a social network as a marketing mechanism to get people to play social games. I know that sounds a little bit convoluted or maybe a little crazy, but really seriously, if you look at where Facebook is making their money, a huge percentage of their activity where they're profitable is social games. It's games by companies like Zynga and Playfish and so forth. So that's a really big shift. I think that's also a story that hasn't been told as widely as it should be. Because we tend to think that a company like Facebook is going to make their money on advertising, and so far that hasn't really been the case.
Well, they're making a lot in advertising, but to your point, what's interesting is Zynga's announcement of their new initiative a couple weeks ago up in San Francisco, and you saw their first baby steps into this with Farmville on the iPad a couple of years ago. They're moving their games off of the Facebook canvas. there's less dependency to have to be in the canvas and in the page within Facebook, as long as you still have the connect. And the new advances that they've had with Social Graph, and you see High Five trying to do this with their game platform, you're going to be able to have the game run independently, like we do with a lot of apps. So think about the apps on your iDevices that just simply say, well, what's your Twitter handle, or what's your Facebook Connect,
and you kind of forget about
it does the connection.
Right.
And we're going to see the same occur more and more in gaming now that also Facebook has moved their economy, that I can spend those Facebook credits even in an outside site as well.
Well, let me ask you guys another question then, Alex or Tom. Do you see these marketing dynamics working for anything other than games? Are people starting to use this elsewhere to drive their businesses?
Sure, there's a big movement called gamification, which uses a lot of the mechanisms that social games use in order to hook people in. And if you think about social games as a behavioral modification system, you can start to apply it into a lot of different places, whether it's retail or whether or not it's enterprise software trying to get your customers to engage more with your platform. It can be a tool like any other. But it can also be misused too. So
well, yeah, that's certainly true. I'm on the record as being a vocal critic of gamification, particularly when it's poorly done. But I appreciate the note. There are great techniques for motivating and incentivizing desirable behaviors, and then games are a great way to do that. But often gamification, unfortunately, degrades into pointification.
Yes,
I know it misses the mark and it makes things boring. I mean, not to dish on Foursquare, but once you've gotten the mayor thing down, what else is there? It's sort of it makes us wonder what's the larger point, and a lot of these gamification programs don't have a larger point.
True. Well, last week we had a great conversation, or 2 weeks ago, with an author who talked to us a little bit about Foursquare, and I have to tell you, he opened my eyes because I was a skeptic, and he showed me that there's genuine power in Foursquare, and where they're heading with those local check-ins is going to really make a significant impact on how advertising and how local commerce works. So I think we're still in the early stages of this. There's a lot of development to be had. Alex, I know you've got to run. If you have any final things you want to share with me, I'd be happy to hear it. Otherwise, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
Okay,
Shoot.
So Friday, I'm going to be in Indianapolis. We're taping the show a little early this week because I have to travel to Indianapolis, where I'm going to be giving a speech to the National Association of State and Provincial Lotteries. So these are the companies, these are the organizations that run the lotteries for all the state and provincial governments in North America. And I'm actually kind of amazed because, first of all, like, why are you inviting me? But what they're very curious about is all these dynamics that we've just been talking about. They want to hear about that. And now here you have a government-run bureaucracy that hasn't really changed its games in many, many years. Their game offerings are still very static. They're very one-dimensional. They're offered on a single platform. A lot of them are still just selling scratcher tickets in cigarette shops or tobacco shops. What advice have you got for the lotteries? What should they do facing this change that's coming, this social game onslaught that's about to hit their market?
Well, I'll jump in. I would think that the one thing that it's probably one area of gaming, aside from my chess example earlier, there's very little social connection at all.
But it seems ripe for it, right?
It would be. It would be that
like
knowing.
I'm playing Powerball, I should be able to tell my friends. I should be able to post that on Facebook.
What the numbers I pick. Yeah, I mean,
totally.
if when I pick my numbers, post that or share that with my other lottery addicted friends, or the same thing with the scratchers. I mean, the scratcher market in and of itself in the lottery business has always been more editorial. They have seasonal promotions. They'll have film-oriented promotions. They'll be much more promotional and
more like a newspaper though.
They'll be time-based. So be able to tap into the fans of a particular theme or season or whatever to show play within that. I would think would be something that would leverage a lot more interest within social circles, is to know that we're all playing the same game.
I think if you were running a lottery, you would have you have a loyal group that buys tickets every single week, and yet I'm willing to bet that they don't have a loyalty program built in. A program where they can actually track the people who are playing the game, know who they are, know what they like, know their favorite numbers, and maybe even customize the game for them.
Well, they've attempted that with the scratcher business, where you can, go in and log in or write your name on the back of the ticket and mail it in, and they'll record that. But that take-up is really low.
Also, it's like, really, seriously, I got to mail it in and use another government bureaucracy, the Postal Service, in order to send that into the government. government. All right, you guys have been great guests. This has been a fun conversation. Alex Pham from the LA Times, thank you very much for joining us. And Thom Kozik, veteran gamer, and a fellow who's been in the game industry for ages, now as an advisor to 3 game companies and 2 investment banks about the gaming space. It's been a pleasure having you on This Week in Social Media. As always, folks, we love to hear from you, so be sure to send us emails, follow us on Twitter, and we will see you next week. Over and out.